I thought he was a very dumb person, but I used him well because every time people saw me come into a meeting with John Bolton standing behind me, they thought that he'd attack them because he was a warmonger. He's the one that got us involved, along with Cheney and a couple of others, convinced Bush, which was a terrible decision, to blow up the Middle East. We blew up the Middle East and we left. Now, we got nothing out of it except a lot of death. We killed a lot of people. And John Bolton was, one of those guys, a stupid guy.
Whatever that was, it needs to be injected in my veins because I loved those statements about the obvious warmonger, John Bolton, who Donald Trump stripped of security and security clearance. And so a reporter asked him about that, and he felt the need to call him a warmonger, call him dumb, and call him out for being part of the neocon brain rot that led the United States to cause all sorts of trouble in the Middle East. And look, he's doing something else that's very surprising, Donald Trump is, because he just selected someone who actually does not want to go to war in the Middle East and wants to use diplomacy when it comes to Iran as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. In other words, he is one of the policy chiefs in the Pentagon who will be making decisions about policy, our foreign policy in the Middle East. So his name is Michael Dimino, and the man in question has quite a background. So he was a military analyst at the CIA, where he specifically focused on issues pertaining to counterterrorism. He's also a fellow at Defense Priorities, which is a Koch-funded outfit, but the Koch brothers are actually isolationists. So in this one area, I agree with the Koch brothers because they want to stop spending money on needless wars, and an official with the Defense Department during Trump's first term. So he did serve in Trump's first term, but he didn't have a role as significant as this. So people are already freaking out about that. And when I say people, I mostly mean neocon loyalists to Israel. As Jewish Insider put it, the Trump administration's pick for Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East brings a record on Iran, the Houthis, and the region that is alarming pro-Israel conservatives, having described Iran's missile attack on Israel as fairly moderate and urged the US against bombing the Houthis, instead calling for American pressure on Israel. He has called for a reduced US presence in the Middle East and argued that the US does not have any critical interests in the region. Again, please inject this into my veins. In fact, we have a snippet of the conversation that Jewish Insider is referring to. Let's take a look at that.
Even if you believe that ISIS poses some kind of critical threat, you have to look at how massively US capabilities, both military capabilities and intel capabilities, have changed over the past 20 years. We have over-the-horizon capabilities, right? We're able to monitor ISIS in Afghanistan with absolutely no presence on the ground there. And there's no reason, with all the other US bases in the region and even in Europe, that we could do that, do something similar in Iraq and Syria if you're really concerned about the presence of that group. But I'd argue really the reason that we're in Iraq and Syria is to sort of deny oil to the Assad regime, in some kind of hope that will ultimately, lead to his ouster. And then really the answer, I think Mitch McConnell even made comments to this effect a couple of weeks ago, we're really there to counter Iran. And that's really at the behest of the Israelis and the Saudis.
We're really in the Middle East to counter Iran at the behest of the Israelis and the Saudis. That's what he said there. Now, that conversation took place in February of last year, which is why he was alluding to Assad still being in power. Now, Dimino said the United States can prevent terrorist threats emanating from the region without a major military presence, instead using diplomacy, leaning on local actors, intelligence monitoring, and long-range strikes. He said the US should significantly reduce its troop presence in the region, remove military outposts in Iraq, Syria, and the Levant, and ultimately reassess its presence in the Gulf. So I have more. This is just the beginning. We just barely scratched the surface, but Oh my God. I mean, we haven't had anyone in the State Department, in the Pentagon, who is willing to call things as he sees it, who's willing to actually speak out about how we don't have any real interest in the Middle East and we're really there specifically at the behest of Israel. And so I think it's fascinating. And he had a lot to say about how the Biden administration was helping Israel prosecute the war in Gaza, which we're gonna get to next. But overall, I mean, this is a fantastic pick by Donald Trump and he deserves some credit for that.
Okay, this Mike Dimino guy, love him. And there's a couple of reasons why. Number one, he's correct and he doesn't want to get us into any more wars and he doesn't think that we should just be unilaterally serving Israel's interest or the Saudis' interest. If you notice, he made a really good point. It's not just Israel that wants us to get into a war with Iran. It's Saudi Arabia. Saudis are Sunni, Iran is Shia. They compete in the Middle East, and the Saudis would like us to wipe out Iran on their behalf so they could dominate the Middle East. And they are no less radical or fundamentalist than the Iranian leaders. So, what are we in the middle of a Sunni Shia Israel, Iran fight for? Absolutely not. He's absolutely correct, and he's like, this is a rare guy. I was going to say rare guy. I'm not sure I've ever heard a Republican or Democrat with a position this important saying obviously true things like, we don't actually have a lot of interest in the Middle East. We keep saying this is all existential to America. How is bombing Syria existential to America? How is like starting a new war on behalf of Israel existential to America, other than doing us damage? Right? Other than inviting a lot more terrorism against us. These things are enormously obvious to anyone who hasn't either been paid by the Israeli lobby or is doing propaganda on behalf of the Israeli lobby. We barely have any interest there. The only thing you could imagine is oil, but right now we get plenty of oil from Saudi Arabia and the rest of them. And if we did a deal with Iran, we'd also get plenty of oil from Iran and our gas prices would be even lower. So it's amazing that any Republican or Democrat would pick this guy as the head of the Middle East in the Pentagon. So that's a great day in America. And my God, this is a litmus test too for anyone on the left. If you're opposed to this guy just because Trump picked him, you're not really on the left. You're just in a new party, and I don't know what it is, okay? A new part of the political spectrum. And one more thing for now, and then I have a lot more in a second. But yeah, guys, we told you there was a real tension within the right-wing movement, MAGA, etc., on this issue, and here it is. And it's not just, and I want to be clear, it's not just going in this guy's direction. On the other hand, you have all the establishment neocon war hawks like Rubio, Stefanik, and potentially Pete Hegseth, who would be his boss. Actually, one of our viewers, HXC Mike, says, does it matter if he puts an anti-war Israel critic in that position if Hegseth is going to oversee him? And that is the question. That's the central question in terms of foreign policy for Trump's second term. Is he going to side with the Rubio Hegseth pro-Israel neocons, or is he going to side with the Dimino portion of MAGA? Now both are in the building, and that is fascinating.
Well, let me give you some more details about what's going on right now with the Pentagon under Donald Trump, because to me, it's become clear that the wing of the MAGA movement that wants to purge neocons is now starting to be pretty influential. I don't know how many of these people are in Donald Trump's ear, but I just want to give you a quick spoiler. Dimino is not the only person within this new administration that wants to pursue diplomacy and does not want to go to war with Iran. In fact, regarding the threat that Iran poses to the United States, he poured cold water on that as well. And he did so during a radio interview last February. This was a radio interview with The Shoot with Peter Boyles. Let's take a look at what Dimino had to say.
The people that try to tell you that Iran is somehow going to take over the Middle East or something, I think it's fear mongering, and I think it's pablum, and it's not supported by the facts. What's going on in the Middle East right now is a classic example of what we call horizontal escalation, where you start to see the conflict spread to Lebanon, to Iraq, to Yemen, right, with the Houthis. And none of this is good for the United States. And I think that the Biden administration has really failed in putting its foot down and saying, look, this has to de-escalate. and we have to bring about a cessation of hostilities here, in the region. And look, the United States in past Arab-Israeli conflicts has stayed out of it and has pursued de-escalation. And I think that that's really the most responsible thing to do here.
I loved everything he said there. In November of 2023, he put out a policy paper and said that it was in the United States' interest to use diplomacy to end the war in Gaza ASAP. He also said that wiping out Hamas would only lead to the rise of Hamas 2.0. Now, obviously, the pro-Israel lobby and its allies are absolutely freaking out about this individual being chosen or selected by Donald Trump to serve in the Pentagon. Jewish Insider highlights the fact that Dimino, after Iran's second ballistic missile attack on Israel last year, dismissed the attack as a fairly moderate response to Israeli operations against Tehran and its terrorist proxy groups, and suggested that Iran was holding back. Guess what? Iran was holding back. Iran wanted to give the impression to their people that they fought back against Israel after Israel had done airstrikes in Iran, but they didn't want to kill anybody or hurt anybody because they knew the second someone in Israel gets hurt as a result of their retaliation, well, then all hell will break loose with the United States backing Israel in going to war in Iran. I'm really happy that that didn't happen. I'm happy that, Iran didn't respond in a way that got anyone killed. And look, I'm gonna keep it real. Like, it feels good to hear someone who's going to be in the Pentagon saying these things. I mean, it's obvious, it's true, but it's so rare to hear this from someone who has a modicum of power in the federal government. He has vocally opposed attacking Iran's nuclear program, suggesting that an Israeli attack could lead Iran to release its restraint, and elsewhere praised former President Joe Biden for pressuring Israel not to attack such sites back in April of 2024. And guess what? He's even on the record criticizing some of the so-called accomplishments of the first Trump term, even though he served in the first Trump term. So what was he critical about? Namely, the Abraham Accords. He said, and I'm quoting him, "The Abraham Accords left out the issue of Israel-Palestine, and I think that's a massive mistake. That was largely done because people thought that that's the thorniest issue, that we could set it aside and solve 80% of the rest of the equation, but it doesn't work that way. This conflict is so central to the region, and you can't really address any kind of long-term political arrangements in the Gulf or in the Middle East without also addressing it." Could not agree more. Perfectly stated.
Yeah, I'll go further. So number one, this is an unmitigated win for anyone who cares about the peace movement. So it doesn't mean that he's going to win the overall fight within the administration, but the very fact that he's in there and has these opinions and he's in charge of the Middle East for the Pentagon, that's unbelievable. And I almost don't want to talk about it too much for fear of riling up the establishment and all the neocons and having their, all of Israel's supporters go and attack him, etc. But when he says it's so central, the occupation to solving the actual issues in the Middle East, that is, again, an overwhelmingly obvious truth that absolutely no one in Washington will say that is in power. They'll say, "Oh yeah, the occupation." They largely ignore it, but if they don't ignore it, they say, "It's a small thing." No, it's not the small thing. It's the major cancer that causes everything else. And the reason why they ignore it and minimize it is because Israel wants to keep occupying the Palestinians. They've done it for 57 years now. Why do they want to keep occupying them? Because every year they take more land in the West Bank, more land and more land and more land, and now that might also happen in Gaza. So the fact that he's actually calling out the actual issue bravely, that's amazing. I've been waiting a lifetime for this. And I'll go further in saying that, would Biden have appointed this guy? I've got it at a 0% chance. Would Kamala Harris have appointed this guy? I have it at 0% chance. And I don't mean this particular guy. I mean a person that is a Democrat or on the left with the same exact issues. You could find hundreds of people on the left with these same policy issues, but there's no way in the world Kamala Harris would have appointed someone like that.
Now, here's some more information about what Trump has done with the Pentagon. So he actually got rid of the Iran hawk known as Brian Hook on the same day that he tapped Dimino to serve in the role that he will now serve in. Hook was a hawkish advisor who basically backed a maximum pressure sanctions regime that Trump instituted against Iran in his first term. And so Trump got rid of him and on the same day selected Dimino to serve in the Pentagon. And it's unclear exactly why Trump axed Hook, but the president says he and 3 others are not aligned with our vision to make America great again. That's kind of incredible. And the amazing thing is that before Hook was fired, he was actually working on Trump's transition team for the State Department. Now he's gone. And Cenk, you're gonna really appreciate this. Mark Levin is super salty about what's been going on.
Yes.
He reacted to the Dimino pick with this. Take a look. How'd this creep get a top Department of Defense position?
I'm here for it.
I don't know, but I jump in it. I love it. There's also a lot of rage over Trump promoting his Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, to be the man in charge of diplomacy with Iran. Witkoff was the real estate guy who actually helped secure the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Sagar and Jetty kind of alerted me to this, not personally, but he posted about it on X saying, "Alert, I am hearing of a massive whisper campaign in DC against Steve Witkoff for negotiating the ceasefire and other Trump appointees who want to avoid war with Iran." And I just want to give you one example that I came across on X, and that's a conservative pro-Israel reporter and commentator who says, who basically posted about Witkoff, complaining about him, complaining that he's willing to reach understandings about everything with Hamas, admits that he and Trump team didn't even try to get any additional hostages out, fawns over Qatari leadership again. Remember, Qatari leadership was fundamental in helping to broker the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. And Israel supporters, those who want Israel to do whatever it wants with no repercussions, they don't like the ceasefire deal because they don't think it goes far enough in favor of what Israel's interests are, which is crazy. But I love that they secured the ceasefire deal. Obviously, it's a very fragile ceasefire. Hopefully, it gets past that first 6-week phase and we can look forward to lasting peace in the region. Obviously, that's a difficult thing to bet any money on. But nonetheless, so far, there are some really interesting developments in the Trump administration.
Yeah, I want to go to you guys and give you a voice for a second and address. So we did a poll on this one. Is this a good hire by Trump? I'm actually, to be honest, really surprised that it's 64-36, 64 saying yes, 36% saying no. I mean, I suppose if you say no, I would really love America to start a war on behalf of Israel, you would say, no, I don't want this guy. Oh, I love being neocons. I guess you would say, no, I don't want this guy. But I suspect that a lot of people who said no because it's a Trump appointee. But then you're agreeing with Mark Levin, who is one of the worst right-wing media hosts in the world. He's way more right-wing than Trump. He's way more in favor of wars than Trump is. Why? Okay, I don't get it. I literally don't get why anyone would be opposed to this guy unless they think, no, America should serve Israel. So I'm not trying to criticize you. It's an interesting poll, and maybe you guys could write in and tell me why you voted that way. But a couple of members here, Dragon with a Girl Tattoo, said the Trump administration is bipolar. And guys, that's exactly what we've been trying to tell you. This group of Republicans is a little bit different than old group of Republicans. Before, when I ever talked to a Republican, talking point, right wing, every position is super predictable. When you go talk to MAGA right wing hosts now, they would, one way of framing it is they look bipolar. Why? Because they have internal disagreement. and they allow for internal disagreement. So there's right-wing hosts that are screaming at each other, some pro-Israel, some saying let's get the hell out of the Middle East, and I don't know why we're funding Israel. And that dynamic of that base being split is now showing up in the Trump administration, and he's appointing people on both sides. That is a really interesting development. And the last thing is, this is a little bit critical, and that's why I want to address it. Jenks Left, Tricep of Fury, great member of ours at TYT.com, said the only reason he's bad-mouthing Bolton is because Bolton dissed him continuously after leaving his cabinet. Trump still has no problem with war hawks like Lindsey Graham, etc., just as long as they kiss his ass. I would say two things can be true at the same time. You're right, he mainly hates Bolton because Bolton bad-mouthed him. Lindsey Graham kisses his ass, he says he's fine. But while that's true, his MAGA base definitely has an anti-war contingent, and it is sizable. And Trump is also not going to put in a guy like Dimino unless he thinks that he's serving that base with that pick. So there you have it. That's the MAGA base. At least some portion of them saying we don't want war.
Thanks for watching. If you become a member, you get to watch all this ad-free, except for, of course, this ad. Still, hit the join button below.